Next, I'd like to recognize our next panel as Representative Bobby Payne is the moderator for that. If I had a moniker for him, it would simply be Great American. He is definitely someone you can count on. He was elected to the Florida House in 2016. Very active his whole entire tenure here in water environmental issues. And Representative, we're going to make a turkey hunter out of you yet.
Thank you, John. It's an honor to be here. Turkey hunter or turkey, one way or the other, huh? So the next panel we have is a Potable Reuse Commission discussion. Let me introduce those panelists. Paul, I'm going to do an abbreviated introduction. Paul Steinbrecher. Paul is a JA Environmental Services Group, which includes environmental permitting and compliance oversight for JA's numerous electric and water business facilities. Prior to joining JA in 2001, Paul was a process engineer and program manager for CH2M Hill, designing water and wastewater systems for businesses and utilities worldwide. He's highly active in the Florida environmental policy for both water and electric utilities. Also, Brian Wheeler, City of St. Cloud. Brian is interim director of environmental utilities for the City of St. Cloud, and after retiring from Toho Water Authority in 2018. Is Brian here?
Yes.
Brian's raising his hand. Thank you, Brian. He is presently a vice chairman of the Potable Reuse Commission, and Brian is a life member of the American Water Works Association with the Water Environmental Federation, holds a BS in civil engineering and MS in sanitary engineering for Virginia Tech, and is a registered professional engineer in the state of Florida. Lynn Spivey, director of utilities for the city of Plant City, with over 25 years experience in a wide range of related water resource management, including potable water reuse, water and wastewater treatment, and distribution. Ms. Spivey holds a BS degree in chemical engineering from the University of South Florida, and Lynn is currently the president of Water Reuse Florida, chair of the Florida Potable Reuse Commission, and director at large for the Florida Water Environmental Association. Carrie Cates. Carrie here? Gary, raise your hand. You got to raise your hand. I don't know all of you that well, so you need to raise your hand to be recognized. Director of Water and Natural Resources for the Florida Fruit and Vegetables Associations. He's a professional engineer, monitor, engages in state and federal level legislation and regulations pertaining to water use, quality, water supply planning, wetlands, and property rights. Kerry also acts as the liaison between FFVA members and the state water management districts, FDP, FDACS, Office of Agri-Water Policy, and EPA. Holds a degree in both geology and civil engineering from the University of Florida. Go Gators if you're a Gator fan. And is a registered professional engineer within the state and is a LEED accredited professional. And Laura Jacobs Donaldson is attorney with Manson Bowles, Donaldson and Varn. Ms. Donaldson is a shareholder of Manson Bowles, Donaldson and Varn, it's hard to say, in its Tampa office and Florida Bar certified attorney in the area of city, county, and local governments. She represents clients from legislative and executive branches of government, local government, environmental, and growth management issues, including having served as general counsel for the Southwest Florida Water Management District. In addition to her practice, including drafting complex and technical interlocal agreements, contracts, and other transactional documents, as well as assisting with water and environmental permitting issues. So, panel, welcome. Thank you for being here. And I think, Paul, you're up first. Is that correct?
I am. Do you want to say a few words?
Sure.
Go right ahead.
Am I on?
Are you on? That's what we do in the
there you go.
legislature. We can't tell if we're on sometimes. So
You have to have the green light so you know when to
there you
speak.
go. Good.
So I'm Laura Donaldson. So originally my job was to help kind of bridge the gap between the presentations with Paul going first and then Brian, then Lynn Spivey and Carrie Cates. Because of the hurricane, Lynn Spivey's not here today because her EOC has been activated. So I have moved from moderating in between the presentations to giving Lynn's presentation. So if we seem to be up here talking, it's because we have rearranged how we're doing our presentation today. And with that, Paul, if you'd like to talk on what's happening nationally on potable reuse.
Thanks, Laura. So let's start with a national view, if we're loaded up. Do I need to do anything up here? There we go. So I'm going to talk about what other states are doing. I'm going to end with, hey, we're well along on our process here in Florida. So obviously, lots of people are doing this already in the United States. AIF's been good at featuring this technique for 3 or 4 years in a row now. So if you look at this map of the nation, you'll see green dots, which are pilot or R&D facilities. It's common to do those early in these projects, and blue dots, which are full-scale, actual potable reuse facilities. Let me feature 4 of those. As you can see, there's a bunch. Orange County, California, Los Angeles, they've been doing this for 20 years. They've got a 100 million gallon per day plant that they recharge an aquifer with. They're expanding it to 130 million gallons per day now. San Diego has a very large facility. They're augmenting their surface water supplies with it. They stick it in reservoirs. El Paso, Texas is building a very large facility now. They have surface water. They have groundwater. They're not going to put it in either of those. They're going to do what's called direct. They're going to treat it to pure water standards and stick it right in the pipe with the other 2 sources. And if you go over to Virginia, Hampton Roads, Virginia is converting 5 of their 6 regional water reclamation facilities to potable reuse. They'll recharge an aquifer with it, and they'll pull the same water out of the aquifer. So it's a growing technique in the U.S. Education is a key component, both on a local scale. There's some examples of what I'm doing in my community, and at a state level it's needed. And I want to thank AIF and the PRC and the water management districts who have been doing that state level communication, and will be doing a lot more of it as we move forward. So let's talk about the states. I'm going to give you 4 examples shown at the bottom there. What happens state by state is they go through a regulatory continuum of development. Usually it's case by case. Somebody wants to do a project and they permit the one project, right, as a one-off. But as the technique expands, what you really need is regulatory certainty for the projects. And so the state wants to develop a regulatory program. It's beneficial for everybody. There's a bunch of different elements that are common. I am not going to go through those. You got to get the technology right. You got to have some monitoring. You got to show financial capability of doing these things. Those are common amongst these state programs. Want to thank a partner, which is the Water Research Foundation and Jeff Mosher. They have been helping the Florida PRC with this very thing, and I collaborated with Jeff on putting some of these next slides together for you. So let's step through those 4 states, and I'm going to have some fun with it and give them each a little bit of a personality. So here's California, and I'm going to call them prescriptive, and I've drawn some handcuffs there. Is it any surprise to people in Florida that they like to regulate stuff in California, and that makes things expensive? So they specify both performance and technologies there. That's unusual. A state would usually specify one or the other. Most states would say, we're going to tell you the performance we want you to have, and they let the private sector figure out the most efficient way to do that. Of course, California does both. They have regs in place. We just talked about that. They put it in the groundwater. They put it in reservoirs. And it's hard to read that document on the bottom right, but this is California for it. They're going to study direct potable. They're going to evaluate the feasibility of maybe developing a uniform. You get a feeling for that, right? They're going to take their time because they have state agencies with lots of resources. So it gives you a flavor for California. Arizona, I would call collaborative. There's our happy cactuses hugging each other on the top there. There's a reason for that. When you fly into Arizona, you don't have to explain the need for potable reuse to anybody. You see it in that picture on the right. It's a bunch of rocks and cactus. People inherently know it there. They've been practicing aquifer recharge in Scottsdale, where all those golf courses are, for a long time. They stick it in the ground, they pull it back out, and they drink it later. They have lots of percolation like Florida. They do some recharge now, and they're developing a potable reuse program now. They've got a framework document in place. Really all they're waiting on, they're going to wait on a large utility that says, I want to do a direct potable project, and then they'll use that project to help build their state regulation. So here's Texas, right? Their own country. You have to understand a little bit about Texas water law. In Texas, if you're over it, it's yours. And because of that, it drives a lot of what they do. They do a lot of recharge now. They've done a number of direct projects where they put it right in the pipe and drink it. They just don't have any regs for it, and they're not planning to have any regs for it. They do it case by case, and they like it that way, and they're going to keep doing it that way. Colorado, very different yet again, very methodical. So they don't have any projects proposed. They probably aren't going to have any for 5 to 10 years, but they're going to be ready. So I've got the 10th Mountain Division there. They're all marching in lockstep. They've got their multi-stakeholder group. They're working on this, and they're going to be ready. They have a long-term process, and they'll have their regs and their legislation done way before it's needed, which brings us to Florida. And so the jury's kind of still out here. We've been talking about this for a long time, especially in this forum. I think we're ready for it. There's a lot of need and interest here. Our biggest challenge in Florida is probably this rain we're about to get this weekend, right? If you get greater than 50 inches a year, and then look at that map on the bottom right, that's the surface water that we all see in Florida. Every time you look out your house windows or your car windows, there's water everywhere, and our citizens don't understand that doesn't mean the drinking water resource isn't limited. So we have lots of people ready to do this. Clearwater has permitted and designed one. They're good to go when the economics fit for them. JA's ready to move to the next phase and do a demonstration study. Altamont has led the way and done their demonstration level work. So we've had a number of those in the state, and people are lining up to be able to do this, and we're permitting them case by case right now. And there's a young man showing, he's drinking the water and showing us how good it is. Those are the attributes of potable reuse as an alternative water supply that you can see there and read for yourself. So we have quite a few utilities in the state that are ready to begin moving forward with this, and I've had a pleasure of working on this PRC with the others up here, and we look forward to developing the regulatory framework to assist with that.
Great, thank you, Paul. Laura, you want to continue moderating, and you can be the
You're Mr.
primary moderator, and I'll be the secondary.
Oh, no, Mr. Chair, I know better than that. I think my job was more to smooth between having seen all the presentations. So Paul just gave us a good perspective on what's happening nationally, and then Brian is going to talk about why potable reuse in Florida.
So,
No, I don't think it's on.
there we go, all right. So, why do we need potable reuse in Florida? So these are some numbers I think everybody's familiar with. It's what the water supply challenge. We know the issue about the population growth, the water demand, public supply demand is going to increase to almost 3.1 billion gallons a day, and we need an additional 580 million gallons a day in our public supply. So I think this begins to tell the story right away. 67% of Florida is in water reuse caution area. We know our groundwater is our primary source of drinking water. Paul showed the map that showed Florida with all the water in it. When I talk to people about water supply and potable reuse, I like to use the phrase I have here, water everywhere, but not a drop to drink. And that's what we mean is we don't have any more inexpensive, readily available, clean groundwater to drink. We have plenty of water, and that's, again, the message of where's our water supply going to come from? We know it's got to come from, it's already been designated alternative water supplies. Some examples of where we're at right now, we have the Central Florida Water Initiative, which right here in Central Florida, we know that the level of 2035 demand already exceeds the availability of the aquifer. So we don't have enough water to meet the 2035 demand in Central Florida. Southern water use caution area, everybody already knows that. We already have problems we're trying to recover from overdrafting the aquifer. And then you have North Florida Regional Water Supply Planning Area, somewhat similar to the Central Florida Water Initiative. Again, not enough water to meet the growing demand in the area. So why potable reuse in Florida? Reclaimed water has the potential to become an alternative water supply. I think the numbers here tell the story. Total wastewater effluent in Florida last year was 1.68 billion gallons a day. Non-potable reclaimed water use was 812 million gallons a day, so that means you got 787 million gallons of wastewater effluent that's presently not being reused in any manner. So that's the potential for the source. So you're going to look at potable reuse as a supplement. It's not going to become the primary source of drinking water. It's going to be an add-on to an existing primary source of drinking water. And the benefits for it, and why you might want to begin to thinking about it, is because it's a resilient, consistent, sustainable source. It's not dependent upon the climate. You have a drought, same amount of water is going to be there. You know what the quality is because domestic wastewater has a consistent quality of water, so you know what your treatment levels are going to be. So it's a good source to think about. If you have a discharge, it's going to reduce the environmental impacts. You're going to take wastewater that's being discharged, creating an environmental impact. You're going to make it a drinking water source. And one of the key issues, it reduces competition for remaining groundwater supplies. And my friend here to the right, Mr. Cates, in the agriculture industry, what groundwater we have left is the water that the agricultural industry needs to continue to grow and develop. And if the public supply is competing with the agricultural supply, that's not a good situation. If we can move to alternative water supplies, leave that groundwater available for agriculture, both of us can continue to grow. The other thing is potable reuse has become an acceptable source of water going forward. As Paul pointed out in his presentation, there's entities that are beginning to use potable reuse. Technology and research have demonstrated the ability to produce a potable reuse that's protective of public health. And actually, to a large degree, if you look at the research and what's being done, you can actually see that potable reuse might even be more protective of public health than your actually public supply is at the present time. There's a growing number of utilities that are implementing potable reuse, becoming more acceptable in the industry, Western state utilities. And as Paul pointed out, an example in Virginia, also Georgia is beginning to have some potable reuse. All your national associations involved in the water industry have all accepted potable reuse as an alternative. EPA endorses it. National Research Council endorses it. The American Water Works, all these agencies are behind and pushing forward with potable reuse as an alternative water supply. But the real issue has always been to me is the cost. Nobody's going to be looking at doing potable reuse in Florida because you do have other water sources unless it's cost competitive with the other sources out there. And over the last 10 years, the cost of actually producing potable reuse has become extremely competitive with the other alternative sources that are available in Florida. Desalination, brackish groundwater, and surface water sources. If you look at the cost, again, within the industry and new technology and new treatment techniques as demonstrated by Altamont Springs, you can develop a potable reuse as a potable water supply a lot less expensive than you can doing desalination or brackish groundwater, or in many cases, a surface water source. Again, when we think about climate change and we think about energy sources, carbon footprint, again, most of your technologies for potable reuse use less energy than many of your other alternative water supply technologies and treatment trains. Your carbon footprint is less, so it's, again, climate friendly, as you want to say. And again, the cost continues to come down, as I pointed out, with Altamont Springs type of process. My former utility, Water Authority, is doing a research and development project using soil aquifer treatment as a part of your treatment process, eliminates the needs for membrane type of technology, again, lowers the cost even more in terms of developing a potable reuse source. So again, to me, the key factor why you're going to even begin to become seriously concerned about potable reuse is the cost, and again, the cost is very competitive to what you're looking at in Florida for alternative water sources. But the other second thing, the key element here, is you have to have public acceptance. I don't care if it's the cheapest alternative source. If you can't sell it to the public, you're not going to do it. Even though it's been endorsed by the key regulatory agencies and industry and professional associations, you get to get public experience associated with it. The public has to begin to accept it and embrace it. And that means that you as a utility, when you go out, have to begin to develop a program to get your public on board before you begin to get serious about potable reuse. Some great examples of that here in Florida has been the Altamont Springs and the Clearwater projects. Both of those had extensive public outreach efforts, a lot of education of their governing bodies, of their public, and built public support as they went forward with their research and development projects. So again, I think the public is beginning to embrace, understand the need for water, understand that potable reuse is a viable alternative. But I want to close with the saying that potable reuse is not the silver bullet. This is not going to solve all the alternative water supply problems in Florida. It's another tool in the toolbox. Utilities will consider on an individual basis, looking at what are the other alternatives. Cost-wise, it's going to be a big issue. Public acceptance is going to be a big issue. Regulatory issues is going to be a big issue. So it's a tool in the toolbox. It's another alternative. And it's, and when you look at reclaimed water, you look at, is it better for potable or is it better to use it in a non-potable situation? So your primary considerations are going to be cost versus other alternatives and your public acceptance of your usage. So.
Thank you, Brian. Laura, you're up.
I'm on, okay. Can I have the remote? I do realize I'm technologically challenged, but. So I'm Laura Donaldson. I am an attorney who has had the privilege to help Water Reuse Florida with the Potable Reuse Commission. And this was a commission, as we're waiting for the slides to come up, that was really put forth on how do we move this issue, move it forward in Florida. We've heard what's happened nationally. We've heard why it's happened, why we need it. But the question is, how do we actually implement it in Florida? So I am playing the part of Lynn Spivey today. So a group of people got together and thought the best way to move potable reuse in Florida forward was to create a diverse stakeholder group to identify and address technical, regulatory, and implementation barriers to the potable reuse in Florida. There have been other groups that have gotten together. Generally, I hate to say it, I do represent some utilities, very heavily utility driven. There was an effort with this panel to not just have utilities on it. We had ag interests with Carrie Cates. We had business interests. We had Department of Health, and I'll show more specifically in a few slides. But it was really important. The other important thing was we wanted to develop a framework to how do we do this in Florida. And with the support of a letter of support from the Secretary, as well as Senator Simpson, we were able to get the PRC created and have been meeting for, a year and a half now? A very, very long time. And sometimes these meetings are very, very long. So the Potable Reuse Commission was a collaborative effort. We had Florida Fruit and Vegetable, Department of Health, the Nature Conservancy, USF Health. We had a professor who was in charge of the department. As a PRC member, we thought it was important to have someone who didn't really understand potable reuse be a part of the decision on how to implement it in Florida. She was kind of our reality check sometimes because we'd throw terms around and she's like, wait, stop. What are you talking about? What does that mean? What's a WUP? What's a this? And so it was really good for those of us who live in the world to have to take an opportunity to say, look, how are we going to explain this to the public if we can't even explain it to the PRC? Water Reuse Florida, we were blessed to have the three big utility associations, Florida Water Environmental Association, Water Reuse Florida, and a WWA Utility Council involved. We also are very lucky we got funding from the water management districts, which was very helpful because this was a collaborative effort with money from the water management districts and the associations. DEP was supportive, and then the Water Research Foundation. I'm not going to read all this, but we had a lot of different varied interests on the board just to get different perspectives. And I will say, he's not here, but Garrett Wallace with the Nature Conservancy was a great addition because he was able to raise issues that his constituents were raising on potable reuse in Florida. Okay, I'm going to skip that. Okay. And this is just a quick list. I'm not going to go. These, as has been mentioned, these are projects. Clearwater, Hillsborough County, JEA, City of Tampa, Daytona Beach has a really neat project. Okay, so let's talk about the PRC. So we wanted to develop science-based recommendations and protect the public health and the environment. That was really important. Every recommendation that we looked at was, are we protecting the public health and are we protecting the environment? Because if we were not doing those two things with each of our recommendations, we knew it'd be a non-starter when we got to the legislature because those were the most important things. And to provide a regulatory path for potable reuse projects. And I will say, because I did write some of the contracts, the goals did change from when we started at the very beginning until now, because that's what happens when you have a consensus-based process. You're not voting, you've got to be flexible, because at the end of the day, we want to have a document that everyone agrees to. So the approach was we got guidance from the Water Research Foundation, in part because they've been involved in other initiatives across the nation. So we didn't want to just start it blind. They're internationally recognized. They were credible, scientific. We felt like that would be important to have a national stamp on the document. But at the same time, as Paul went through, every state is different. And we wanted to make sure that Florida's recommendation was built for Florida. And we had some struggles, but wanted to really make sure that this was this would be what would work in Florida. We had a lot of meetings and a lot of phone calls, different workshops, a lot of participation, a lot of comments. As you can see, the 18 meetings in the Florida Administrative Register, those were just what was noticed. One of the things that we decided, although we are not an agency and not required to follow Sunshine, we did feel it was important to notice our meetings in the Florida Administrative Register. Hosted 3 workshops, 30 state and national presentations. There were probably hundreds and hundreds of hours of phone calls to develop the recommendation. Honestly, I think you'd all agree, at times it was quite a painful process. Initially, we identified the topics, we collected stakeholder input, developed a public review document, and the hope was last week we were going to have a meeting to approve the final guidance document report for the PRC. It was very exciting, and then that didn't happen, and they rescheduled it for Wednesday, and unfortunately, the Hurricane Dorian, once again, is going to push it off. It's like the project that won't die. But we soon will have a final report that will be approved by the PRC soon. For those of you, all of the information is on the Water Reuse Florida. If you click Potable Reuse Commission, you can get the report. It's interesting to read and long. It is very interesting. I'm not going to go through the guideline. Okay, so I'm going to go through this. How much time do I have? I didn't look to. Okay, I'll go through these really quickly because I know we're standing between you and the reception. And the last thing you want at 4 o'clock in the afternoon is to hear a lawyer talk about regulatory recommendations. I know it's very exciting, so I'm going to fly through these as much as possible. Okay. So what we did in this report is there's things about national, about potable reuse. Like, for example, it sounds crazy, we have indirect potable reuse projects in Florida. Some of them deal with groundwater under our existing regulations. That's actually not indirect potable. So there are things that our rules have not stayed up with the technology. So there are going to be drinking water related regulations, and at the end of the day, it's they have to meet drinking water standard, right? I mean, that's just an important issue. We are proposing that legislation directs FDEP to adopt new potable reuse rules and have a stakeholder technical advisory. I'm only smiling because you'll hear me say stakeholder technical advisory like 4 or 5 times. Source water pathogens. One of the things that we want to do is have DEP adopt new rules for pathogen treatment. This goes back to we need to make sure that the water is safe and that we can tell the public that the water is safe. Once again, we are proposing to have a technical advisory committee to assist DEP. Emerging constituents, so, this is the stuff that's not regulated, could be regulated. We had a meeting this morning talking about PFAS, which is this stuff that's in water and it loves water and it's hard to get out of water, but it's not, there's no regulations that state that you have to have less than a certain amount. So we're asking for legislation directing DEP to implement the PRC emerging constituents approach. And that approach is this. We are going to be asking for potable reuse projects that the water be treated to higher standards than drinking water standards. So water that comes out from a potable water system will be treating emerging constituents that currently don't have to be treated. And I don't really think of this as a clear glass. If I had water here and said this is current potable drinking water standards, this is really good, right? I can drink it. And then Carrie's water is potable, direct potable reuse or from indirect potable reuse. And that water is better and cleaner and safer than this water. That's what we're doing. Now, the unintended consequences of this will be at some point, someone's going to say, well, why is this water not being treated to that standard? And that is something that we grappled with, as well as the DEP, as we develop rulemaking, we'll have to deal with. I'm going to skip through those because those are way in the weeds. One of the big things is ensuring that direct potable reuse, and we unfortunately did just assume that you know what direct potable reuse. Direct potable reuse is pipe to pipe wastewater to your potable water system. Indirect, I say it's the kiss of nature, and sometimes it's very expensive kiss, where you put it in the ground, you put it in the surface water, and you pull it out later on. So we want to make sure that these direct potable reuse projects don't need a water use permit. It's like a desal plant doesn't need a water use permit. It's that same theory. Protecting springs, we thought this was really important. Currently, these projects can't impact water quality for springs, but we wanted to make sure as a PRC that any future rules are very clear that they can't cause water quality impacts to springs. Because what is the point of creating new water supply if we ruin the springs in the process? And I mentioned earlier changing the IPR definition. And then finally, some of the water management districts are very, very good at funding cooperative projects, partially because they have money, partially because they don't have the Everglades that takes all their money. And some water management districts have rules that we need to figure out, how do we incentivize these type of projects? Sorry, I am trying to, okay, yep, we're gonna, she's not here, she can't get mad at me. So in summary, what the PRC report, and it is, it's like 150 pages. I've read it a couple times. I try to block it out. In summary, the proposal is gonna be, we need legislation because we think DEP needs to be directed on what to do. We're gonna have rulemaking. There's gonna be technical advisory committees related to the DEP rules, related to incentivizing these projects. We're gonna have a working group that's slightly different. And the last bullet, which is great, is there's more meetings. I jokingly say this is the Consultant and Lawyer Relief Act, because we're not going to be done even once we get this report done, because we're going to go into legislation and rulemaking. And with that, that's the PRC. I know I've glossed over it very quickly. This was really a great cooperative effort with so many different interests, and they made it a priority. People showed up to these meetings. We spent hours on the phone. And it's great that we're going to be able to go to the legislature with a report that's been approved to show how do we move Florida forward related to potable reuse. Oh, and there's more. So if you want, here's the website, prc.waterreuseflorida.com, for more information. And we need, so September 4th, thanks Hurricane Dorian. Sometime soon, we will be having the meeting. If you're interested, you can let me know, or you can find any of us, and we will give you when the next meeting will be set. And with that, we're going to send to Carrie to talk about, from his perspective, why his involvement with the PRC and as a stakeholder, the importance of potable reuse in Florida.
Because you threatened me.
No comment.
All right, is it,
Just that awkward silent pause to see if your screen's going to come up.
They're doing this on purpose because they know happy hour is soon, so they're trying to just torture you to stay a couple minutes longer.
well, we know we're standing between them and happy hour, but I also know that they've been waiting a long time to listen to me, so I'm going to take my time.
Good.
It's short, y'all, I promise.
Back to the well, a long second.
All right, well, I'll just go ahead and start.
There it is.
perfect. Maybe it's voice control. So obviously, I'm here representing the agricultural perspective on the PRC. And so why potable reuse? Why is this something that we feel is important and is something that we should support? Well, I think everybody is aware that public supply and agriculture are the two largest users of water in the state. However, agriculture, our farmers and our ranchers, our options regarding available water, it's very limited. So when the utilities can present with a viable, effective, sustainable, and safe technology to secure our water supplies, that's something that's going to garner our attention, and it's something that we are going to give the proper respect and attention to. And additionally, we recognize the potential benefits from an agricultural perspective. Just a couple examples. Up in Northeast Florida, in the North Florida Regional Water Supply Partnership area, a lot of our growers, they have been noticing a steady increase in chlorides within their groundwater wells that they utilize for irrigation. This is particularly true east of the St. Johns River. And it's been particularly detrimental to our potato growers up there, and their crops have been negatively impacted as a result of this. And we view that potable reuse, that could be a potential option to try to help buffer both saline and saltwater intrusion. Additionally, in the Dover Plant City area, there is now a water use caution area that was established in 2011 as a result of an unprecedented freeze that took place in 2010. But as a result of that and the new rules that have been instituted, there are groundwater withdrawal restrictions. And again, we view the use of potable reuse as a potential tool that could help stabilize those groundwaters and potentially augment them. That's something that our strawberry growers in particular are following closely and are interested in, because for them that means a potential expansion of their acreages, and they'll be able to secure additional allocations for frost freeze protection. So really, in a nutshell, this just makes sense. It's really hard to argue. Both direct and indirect, it grows the water pie. There is benefit to all stakeholders, the resource, and obviously the environment, and it helps sustain a clean and safe water supply. And sustainability, that's key. That's what we're looking for. And if we have technology, an alternative water supply technology that could promise on all of those fronts, that's something that we as an industry are going to support. There's already been a lot said about the public perception issue. That's obviously something that the PRC has been cognizant of, and we are still working to address that and trying to take the proper actions regarding both education and outreach. Obviously, Paul and JEA, they've been doing this for a while, and they have a very good outreach plan already in place. But we do realize that there are still some challenges inherent to trying to get this into becoming a reality. Again, Paul mentioned California, Arizona, and those western states. The drivers out there, it's painfully obvious. Again, you look out your window, you look out your car window driving down the road. For those folks, it's very, very obvious as to why this is something that needs to be put into practice. And it helps facilitate the public acceptance. Whereas obviously in Florida, it's a very different story here. You fly over the state, all you see is a landscape dotted by lakes, ponds, rivers, and streams. So water is a very prominent feature on our landscape. And so that really, unfortunately, reinforces that the public disconnect regarding the perceived water supply versus what reality is telling us and what is actually occurring out there. So it really makes that conversation with the general public that much harder to try to solicit buy-in. And obviously, we are growing, and we continue to grow. We surpassed 20 million people back in 2015. I spent a year in Australia back in 2004, and back then, 20 million, that was the population of the entire country of Australia. Now we are around, I think, upwards of 21.5 million. So obviously, water supply needs to be on our radar, and it needs to be something that we take seriously. Also considering the fact that our growth rate is really not slowing down. I think everybody is familiar with the statistic at this point. We have a net migration of about 1,000 people per day moving into the state. And there has to be consideration given as well to the impact from our tourism industry. We have about 120 million people, if not more, that visit the state annually. And obviously, along with our residents, they rely on a reliable and sustainable water supply. And the fact of the matter is, it's a finite resource. And I think every day it becomes more and more apparent. All you have to do is, open a newspaper, go online, see some of these articles. It's really becoming hard to escape. And obviously, I'm not insinuating that Florida's situation is similar to any of these locations. Obviously, that would be naive and frankly misleading. However, it's just really important to, I think it underscores the importance of us as a state being proactive, regardless of the industry, when it comes to making sure that we do have that sustainable water source for all, whether it's agriculture, the public supply, commercial, and the environment. And I'm going to leave you with this. Obviously, you just saw this in Laura's presentation that was provided by Lynn. Lynn quite frequently has this incorporated in her presentations that she gives. And from my standpoint, it's a pretty powerful slide. And I think it sends a pretty poignant message. You look at all the various entities that are represented on this slide, and it just illustrates it takes something of great magnitude to bring together such a diverse gathering of stakeholders. And for us to come together in solidarity under a common cause, I really think that speaks volumes. And that's something that really, I hope, is going to resonate with the general public regarding this initiative in the same way that it's resonated with many of our elected officials and our policymakers. But I told you it was short, so there you go. Thank you.
Thank you, Kerry. In the interest of time, since some of tomorrow's canceled, we have another speaker coming up. So I'm going to hold questions. If you don't mind catching the panelists afterwards, if you have questions for them. Panelists, thank you for your work with PRC. You guys have spent a lot of time, put a lot of hours in. As a legislator, we're looking forward to your recommendations. And certainly I will be engaged, as water is one of the issues that I find most potentially most troubling, but also one that I have most interest in my bailiwick as far as things that I want to do as we move forward. So let's have a round of applause for our panelists today. Thank you.